themselves and their organization. And conflict resolution is definitely an interest of hers, in particular interpersonal conflict and conflict mediation between groups and stakeholders. So her bio is on the Fall Forum SharePoint page. Sally will post a link to that if you would like to read the rest of her bio. Diana, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, so appreciate you all being here. This has been an awesome experience, Susie and others. The Fall Forum's been a wonderful experience this year as former years. So we're going to talk today about conflict, and the title is whether or not conflict is healthy or negative. I'd like to introduce myself as Susie did. I am Diana Koppes. I am a member of the Support Services Division. I've always been interested in how people communicate with one another. I've studied about how people interact with each other, both just verbally between one another, body language, everything having to do with communication. And so conflict is part of communication. I've had jobs where I was given the opportunity to guide people, to coach people about how to know when conflict is happening, because sometimes it's not as obvious as others, and then know what to do in response. I'd love to share some of what I've experienced and provide you with a perspective of conflict that you may not have considered before now. In addition to dedicating most of my adult life to working in the public sector, I'm also an academic in the field of psychology. Although an academic outside of my day job, this is not going to be a theoretical perspective of conflict. This is going to be a practical application or a practical sense of what conflict is. And it's something that I use personally. So I thought maybe I would talk with you about how I see conflict and potentially how you might be able to see it as well. So parts of what you see are meant to cause self-reflection. You'll see in the Slido questions, there's some of that happening. And examine how you feel about conflict, because that's an important aspect of conflict, is how we personally feel about it. And that can influence the way we react to it and how we actually show up in conflict. And so some of the information you'll already know. There are people on, I can see people's names on the screen who actually train in this field. So they know what I'm saying, but some of the information may be new and may cause you to think a slight bit differently about conflict. So as I mentioned, we'll be using Slido during this presentation. There'll be a number of opportunities for us to look at conflict, either from our own personal perspective or just holistically look at conflict. So thank you for your participation in that. And with that, we'll get going. So next slide, please. For purposes of conversation, it's important to know, and this is potentially a point of conflict for a lot of people and situations, is we need to have a common understanding of what conflict means today, right now, in what I'm talking about. So when I'm talking about conflict, we're going to say that conflict is when two people or groups of people have a disagreement, or when two people contradict one another, or when their views or opinions or ideas are varied, maybe not completely different from one another, but are varied, or oppose one another. And it, to some degree, that seems simple, but it never actually is. So we'll find out what that there's conflict and what conflict means. So, or what conflict is. It's that can be that complex when we think about it. We'll also see that conflict can happen in ourselves. And that's at least an idea that I'm going to talk with you about, because sometimes if we don't address that piece of it, it very much overshadows how the whole conflict will play out. So you see 3 images on the screen. These are images I chose to represent conflict. Image 1 is where someone is standing in between 2 people and they're having a difference of opinion. It'd probably be better off if they calmed down. Image 2 is where 2 people look like they're about ready to fight. And they need to actually be separated by that third person in the middle. And then image 3 is something that we don't often think about, but it's a struggle between ourselves, me and myself. And that struggle is between, often comes in terms of choices, right? Between good or something bad. So there's 3 images of conflict here. Image 1, image 2, image 3. Susie, if you'd put up the first Slido. The question is, which image do you relate to most when you think about conflict? Is it image 1, image 2, or image 3? Go ahead and weigh in on that. Just another couple seconds. Okay, let's look how people have weighed in on what they think conflict is. Now, this is a personal choice, so nothing is right or wrong. It just is.
It's not showing up for Sally. Hold on one second.
Should I move on?
Are you able to see the results, Diana? Maybe you can just speak to it.
I am not able to see the results. I don't have that up.
Susie, should I let you share the screen?
Yeah, if it will let me. It's not letting me. That's okay.
Diana, it's showing up on our phones.
Okay. And Stephanie, can you tell me which one shows up with the most choices?
Image number 3 at 19%.
Image number 3. Great.
It has image 1 at 30%, image 2 at 51%, and image 3 at 19%.
So the middle is the 53%. oftentimes we think about conflict that way. It's like that, that's the, I don't know if you would use the word traditional way of thinking about conflict, but often we show up, we think about conflict as that, that real tension between people requiring some sort of separation or space or calming down, if you will. Image 2 is, image 1 comes in second, of course, because there is some sense that conflict does need some sort of peacekeeping process or person. So great with that. And image 3 is something that doesn't come up as often for people thinking about conflict in ourselves. So next slide, please. Thank you for that. Thank you for your answers in that space. So here's what I want us to think about a little bit differently about conflict. Conflict occurs every single day. And I want you to shift your brains to thinking about you as a whole person. So you start your day out in your personal life. And so conflict happens at, if for those of you that have kids, at breakfast time, right? I have 2 kids at home. One is 4, she's beautiful, but extremely stubborn. And I have to constantly remind myself that as an adult, her independent nature will be just a wonderful plus. But the reality is, she and I have a conflict from the beginning of the day, right? Breakfast. I fix cereal, she wants pancakes. I fix pancakes, she wants toast. Every day, the same routine, the same conflict. Then my morning goes along and I have to decide for myself. And now I'm in conflict with what's best for my health, right? I'm in conflict with what people have told me about what's best for my health. So I'm making a choice between this or that. The next part of my day is lunch. Now lunch, right, could involve well-meaning friends and family, their interest about my health. They say I should eat this, or instead of that, there's another conflict happening. So these are conflicts in my personal life. And these are conflicts from the beginning of my day. This is kind of where I want you to kind of shift your thinking, in that conflict occurs every day. Next slide, please. The next part of conflict that I want you to think about is it is natural. Conflict is so natural. We start learning and being involved in conflict from a very, 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 very young age. We're playing with our toys. One child has more toys than the other. We're in conflict. You know, there's not conversation about it, but there certainly is an emotional exchange about it. And then sometimes conflict happens so often that we are required to sit still and think about our conflict. Frankly, I do this with my kids, but sometimes I think the conflict gets even worse when they're sitting and steaming. But at least there's a few minutes of silence for my conflict between them and me. In some cases, tug of war conflict, it might seem fun to people, competitive, right? Competition can get the best of us sometimes, and it truly is a conflict, right? One team wants to win. One team is against the other team until, of course, if you're playing real tug of war, you know, somebody lands in the water or the mud. Then lastly, if we ignore conflict, like the 2 pictures below, I mean, this is something in my personal life, right? Both these pictures were perfect when I was picking this out, right? This is my husband and I, right? No matter how loud I get about something or how reasonable I start to be about something, oftentimes he might ignore me. And so we know that doesn't get us very far, but nevertheless, it still happens. conflict is natural. Next slide, please. So I said conflict occurs every day and it is natural. I remember lately I heard Nikotris talk about conflict and saying conflict is required to have transformation. And we are going through transformational times. So we can expect that there's going to be conflict probably every day and natural. Because remember, conflict is not this. It's because Susie and I have a difference of opinion and we need to have a conversation about that difference of opinion. So I've indicated a couple of types of conflict here at work while we're together. There's conflict between two people. It could be me and you. It could be me and my boss. This kind of conflict can be really hard because it's up close and personal conflict, right? I could be in the same room with the person, or I could be in the conversation with the person only. And it feels sometimes too close and intimate, if you will. And so it can be very difficult. There's conflict on a team. The conflict can occur between team members. It can occur between the team and the leader. Leader is trying to carry something out. Team is in opposition to that. You know, the leader has to help guide through the conflict, hopefully. This can be an easier conflict because when there are other people who think similarly to us and we're in agreement with some other people against something else, then that can be kind of an easier conflict. And then there's conflict between stakeholders. In parts of our organization, we often talk with stakeholder groups, either a group of people or in a community, groups of people, and it would be in conflict with their opinions about our agency or about the work we do. So keep in mind, whatever type of conflict we're discussing, we should expect that conflict occurs quite regularly and it's very natural. Next slide, please. Let's watch a short video that shows us about conflict.
Diana, there isn't a link in the slide.
Okay, I can work with that. So what the video talks about is that conflict happens when a team is given something to do. When there are a number of people who have to think about how to get to the objective or goal that's been given to them or that they've defined. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It just is. And I think that's the perspective that I'm trying to enforce here, is that the conflict happens both in our personal lives and our professional lives. We kind of think about that differently than we kind of categorize conflict differently than what we categorize it at home. And so the point of conflict is to get to resolution. And that's what the video was showing us, is that the outcome of a conflict hopefully is a resolution to a problem, an issue, a concern, a difference of opinion. So I want to look at what lies beneath the surface of a conflict. I think you've all seen pictures of icebergs, right? The iceberg, you can see the top of the iceberg above the water, but there's oftentimes much more of an iceberg below the water. That's what it's like for conflict. We can see or experience the surface level conflict, but there's so much going on underneath, and we have to be aware of that. And so I've listed a few things here that I think underlie the surface of a conflict. And so where I say trust, I mean actually the lack of trust can be lying beneath a conflict. And it's because maybe someone is new, I can't trust them because they haven't had the same experiences I have with ODOT or public service or whatever the situation be. So there's a lack of trust there. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's still a lack of trust because I don't yet have that with them. It could be because a person, I've heard something negative about someone else or another group. And it's human nature to kind of take that in and absorb it and sometimes run with it, hopefully not too often. Or it could be an overt reason for lack of trust, right? You have experienced, you have been in an experience with the person or people that you're sitting with, and they have destroyed or damaged the trust between you. And so a lack of trust can be a huge reason underneath the surface of conflict. Another big issue for conflict is the lack of respect, right? Happens in two directions, right? I can feel you aren't respecting me, or I don't have respect for you or your group or what it is your group is trying to accomplish or do. And so these things can happen simultaneously or separate from one another. I think depending on how you handle disrespect, this can be a very serious issue for some people. And we have to be very aware of the fact that this can underlie some of the conflict that we have. And in conflict resolution is hopefully the destination we're all headed for. If everyone's all in on this process of conflict resolution, then buy-in isn't an issue. It's when some people are not bought in completely. And they either give lip service to the process of buy-in, or they're passive aggressive about it with their behaviors. They agree in the room, they nod their head, they get up and they walk out, and then they do something completely different than what they had said they would do. So that's what I mean by buy-in. And lastly, commitment can be an issue in two parts of conflict. So one part is a commitment to understand, and a commitment that everyone needs to understand, not just some people. And everyone needs to have a common understanding. So a commitment to a common understanding. And then there's also a commitment piece when we come to a solution or a resolution, we commit to carrying through with that solution or resolution in such a way that even if I didn't agree with it in its entirety, I can still carry through my part of that process, that resolution. So this is our next Slido question. Which value is most important to you personally? Let's see. Is trust most important to you? Is respect most important to you? Is someone buying into what you've bought into important to you? Or is it the overall commitment, both on the understanding piece and on the resolution piece? Go ahead and weigh in on Slido as to which value is most important to you. Wow, really quick on the trust. Really quick. Trust is a big thing, and often we do not take the time with the people that we work with, to build trust. to even have a conversation about whether or not we trust one another. If we're having to make a public policy decision with a group of stakeholders, we often do a lot of research around what is it that they believe in, that they want, that how they want us to be. We often do that about some other entity, right? But we don't necessarily do it as people, as one-on-one, to understand how I need you to understand this is what I need from a trust perspective. This is what I consider to be needed in order for me to trust you. And vice versa. I don't open myself up necessarily to say to you, what do you need from me in order to trust that what we work through is going to be helpful, is going to help you buy in, is going to help you commit to the resolution. These kinds of conversations are difficult. It feels warm and fuzzy, but it's absolutely necessary. Look how many people in this room feel like trust is the most important part of conflict, right? I need to be able to trust. And so keep that in mind. Keep it in mind that all of you that answered that, or respect, commitment, or buy-in, those are important to you. If given a choice of 4, you chose what you did. And so keep that in mind for you, as if it's important for you, it is likely important for others. And given the prevalence of those that chose trust, trust is a very important issue, and we should always have that in the front of our mind as we work through conflict. Next slide, please. So I want to deconstruct conflict just a little bit to understand the different parts. As I talk through this, I'll just give you a little hint. There's going to be a Slido question, so take notes. No, I'm just joking. Don't take notes. This is not that. There are parts of conflict, and some of us are very good at some parts of it. I hope that given as much as I've studied and practiced conflict, that I'm good at them. But I tell you what, my emotions will get away with me, and man, I will fail miserably in some parts of this. So I always have to remind myself, what are the parts of the conflict and what's happening? And so this is how I walk myself through or talk myself down, depending on where I am emotionally. So, and remember, the way we describe conflict is a difference of opinion, disagreement, etc., between a couple of people or groups. So the first part of conflict is the cause. I love this graphic up in the left-hand corner of the two. It's actually, this graphic is actually about literary conflict. And so, but it was perfect for me. If you visualize somebody and yourself having a conflict and having, that sword fight, if you will. It's two characters standing, if you'll notice, standing on their opinions and ideas, and having this difference. The cause of a conflict can be difficult to determine. Many of us use the 5 whys to try and figure out what are we thinking about and why, right? That's using the 5 whys means when you're thinking and considering a reason for something, you ask yourself why 5 times as you come through these answers to get to hopefully what you believe to be the real cause for yourself. The second part of conflict is discovery. This takes us beyond why we're having the conflict and gets us to what maybe led to the conflict, who's really involved in the conflict, how damaging the conflict actually has been. And that's those things when you're in that discovery piece that I love her looking through, right? She's looking through and trying to find out what else is happening here, what is happening below the surface, if you will. Because oftentimes we'll find out in conflict that it really isn't about that surface conversation that we're having. It's other things. The third part of conflict is acknowledgement. When you go through this process of finding out what the cause is and then exploring or discovering, the details of the conflict or the context of the conflict, once you get, it's important to say, well, yes, there is a conflict, right? This is that part where I said a little bit ago around, even if you ignore it, it is still there. So acknowledgement is a key part of conflict. And lastly, there's resolution. So I love that handshake. I love the different aspects of resolution that slide depicts. Hopefully, in conflict, we get to resolution. That doesn't mean everybody is happy. That doesn't, we have the adage, let's agree to disagree, right? That could be a resolution to a conflict. We're going to stop right now and walk away from this, maybe coming back, different angles, different perspectives, maybe bringing somebody else's new perspective. But resolution is what we're trying to get to. So here's the last Slido question we have. What part of conflict is hardest for you? Is it finding the cause, understanding more about the conflict through discovery, acknowledging or saying yes, admitting there is a conflict? Or is it coming to resolution? Go ahead and let's look at that. Yeah, coming to an agreement is really hard. I get that. Okay. I love Slido. It's so fast, so quick, so spontaneous. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It doesn't give you a chance to think. Just respond. I love it. So resolution, there's so much to unpack in that, right? And this is a 45-minute conversation about conflict. I've been in weeks-long classes on conflict resolution, conflict mediation. So resolution and resolution, a well-constructed resolution helps everyone within the conflict to come away with something that they feel good about. And that's something to really think about. In a well-constructed resolution, everyone in the conflict comes away with something that they can feel good about. That doesn't mean big things, big concessions on the part of anybody. And depending on the resolution and the issue and the conflict, it can be very tiny. But at least think about that. If you can construct your resolution in such a way that everyone feels like there's something that they feel good about at the end, you're going to be successful that way. Next slide, please. So conflict at work is what we were talking about. if we think about conflict in these terms of where conflict on a team or in the workplace is absolutely natural, let's not avoid it. We avoid it, it festers, and then before you know it, you might have that kind of a conflict, which you don't want to have, particularly at work. Conflict in the workplace is healthy, depending on how it's handled, of course. I mean, obviously, there are times when conflict is not handled well, so it is not healthy. But for the most part, we try to be professional. We try to be respectful, and conflict is dealt with in a healthy way. There are options that, if it's not, right, we have options. And then conflict is constructive when it's used to help us grow, understand, and solve problems. And that's what it is, right? Because if I have a difference of opinion with Andy about how we should do something, and it comes to, if we can come to terms with one another's understanding, then we both walk away knowing better, knowing more, having an appreciation for one another that's different than when we came into the conflict. That's important. I think there's if we think about the title of this segment, right? Conflict, healthy or negative? I would say it's healthy. It isn't negative. It's natural. It's constructive. And if we think of it in terms that we can relate to in our personal lives, like I gave you examples of around how I deal with my granddaughter in the morning, every single morning, right? How I choose and struggle with myself around certain things throughout the day. Then maybe how I have differences of opinion with someone that I work with, and carry all of those skill sets and best practices with us in all of the conflict that we have, right? Don't separate it so much. Think about it holistically. Think about conflict as natural, productive, always occurring. And then every time you come into a conflict, there's not that sense. I'll give you away a secret of mine. If we're going to have a conflict together, I usually get like a red neck. It comes out. It's like, oh, okay. But if I think about it differently, conflict doesn't produce those things. There's a big difference between the workplace and home life. I'll give you that. So for those of you that aren't quite getting the connection or don't want to go there, that's cool. I think that the biggest differences for me are at the workplace, there's some sense of equality or inequality that might be affecting my perception of how the conflict is going. Or maybe there's a sense of competition or having to prove myself that affects how I show up and behave in a conflict. So we can be purists if we want about conflict, and we can step back from our emotions that we bring with us to work conversations, meetings, decision makings, like competitiveness. And if we can do that, if maybe we can see conflict just a little bit differently than what we came into this with, if we can see it as positive, if we can see it as healthy and constructive, potentially we can have conflict and it be a different experience for us going forward. It's on each of us to handle conflict with one another successfully. It's not on the other person. It's on each of us. And right now we are always talking about 1 dot. So if we try to remember 1 dot and we're trying to approach differences of opinion and gain an understanding from the other person's perspective, I think we'll be far more successful in conflict than we have been. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to do a shameless plug for HR and the Learning and Development team. They have a great course coming up on the 12th from the 12th to the 16th, and they have it in a great virtual format. I highly recommend this course of Crucial Conversations. This is that part, you can't go into a lot of detail about what to say and how to say it, but when when you participate in this class, they do tell you what to say and how to say it. So it's very helpful in conflict resolution, is how to have those difficult conversations. And last slide, please. So thanks for attending. I appreciate you showing up this late in the day for a conversation that sometimes can be a little prickly. Hopefully I gave you a different perspective to consider as it relates to conflict, and please feel free to reach out if you'd like any additional resources in conflict resolution or conflict mediation.
Diana, you do have a few questions. We have about 4 more minutes. Any suggestions for someone who is naturally a conflict avoider? I'd rather bury my feelings than address it due to fear.
That's probably most of us at any given time, right? And that's some of us most of the time, given our personality styles. I think it's helpful to walk through a conflict with somebody outside of the conflict, right? You and this other person that you trust, and talk through that so that you can have maybe a practice, right? A practice reaction to conflict. I oftentimes do that. So there can be practice. There's also a lot of training on conflict mitigation and mediation that you can attend and at least hear the information, even if your personality isn't such that you would be able to show up in conflict differently. At least you would have that information available to you to maybe lean back on.
Great, thank you. The next one here, we probably have time for a couple more. In my experience, ODOT has 0 tolerance for dissent. What is ODOT doing to improve the reaction of ODOT management to employee concerns?
I've heard this before. I have not experienced it, and I don't discount the fact that it exists. I believe that there is encouragement to, and we use that word dissent, and I don't necessarily know that I would characterize it that way. I mean, it's a difference of opinion, and if couched right with whoever it is you're communicating with, potentially it's easier to hear or receive. But I don't know if in your area of the organization, this is something that happens, or, there's always ways to maybe train more in that area, or talk more openly with somebody who helps you have that conversation. I'm not sure, but I know that I don't know. I've been asked for my opinion lately, and to be honest, I actually wasn't ready to give it, but but I think I was asked because I might have been perceived that my opinion would have been different than what everybody else was saying in the room, which it turned out to be.
We're just about out of time, Diana, but I just wanted to follow up and make sure there are some questions here left in the Slido. Would you be willing to maybe answer those, and then we can post them with the materials as a follow-up? Is that okay?
I certainly can. Thank you.
Okay. We probably have one. I like that. I never have conflict with myself working from home. And then what do you recommend when you have to problem solve business practice issues with someone who owns the process and gets defensive easily?
Whoa. I am the person who always goes at it at different angles until such time as I've exhausted all the different angles. It, for Pete's sake, takes a long time, right? And I have had a conversation with somebody very privately, one-on-one, and said to them very honestly, I've been trying to figure out what to do here. I've really tried to come at it different ways, and every time I do, there's resistance. So what can, and maybe the person doesn't even know. Some people like that don't know. They're not self-aware. And I wouldn't assume that they are. That's probably the biggest point that I would make in that particular question. Do not assume people are aware of the fact that they are difficult, because a lot of people don't know that about themselves. And when you have that private conversation that it's turned out to be that way, I've heard people more than I can actually tell you one time that it didn't turn out to be this conversation about, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to be like that. And then going forward, there was a relationship between me and that couple of people that said, please give me a high sign or whatever when we're in a meeting that I'm being that person. So.
Great. Thank you, Diana. Well, we're out of time. So the materials and the recording will be shared on next week on the SharePoint site. So
thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for taking the time out to be in this conversation around conflict. Bye.